Anyway, I've actually told Gene that he was true Christian than anybody who's done all the terrible things that, in the name of Christianity. Also, I'm going through that asshole part of things where I am freezing. I am freezing. I hate Hashimoto's. I keep on trying to take it off and not look like I'm burritoing myself in the kitchen. But it's either this or I get a jacket in the kitchen. And it is 77 degrees in here, and I feel like it is like 20. I hate Hashimoto's. So, yeah, it was actually a while, before we even figured it out that was why. It's funny, because I was only able to really acknowledge it and feel safe doing so after finding out that it was because of an actual issue, and that it was known. They know that this can do this to you. So, it's not even all the time. I go through episodes of it. It can go on for, weeks, or it can go on for days, or it can go on for hours. It can go on for 5 minutes. It's kind of random. It's kind of bad random. Alright. So anyway, I am actually currently playing Sims for no other reason than I can. Anyway, I've told Gene that he's a truer Christian than anybody. And I was that kid who got yelled at for quote-unquote giving Sunday school answers. And I was giving pretty genuine answers, so... specifically there was an incident whenever I was, in first grade or some stupid shit. And I was sitting in Sunday school, and they asked for a show of hands. It's one of those things where they ask it's a serious question, and, if you give any sort of answer, they get mad at you. But, you have no idea of this ahead of time. This was in the beginning. I hadn't really been to church so much, ever. So, yeah. My mom was pretty accepting. She sort of was just of the mind that her family was so extremely religious that she just wanted us to choose for ourselves, think for ourselves, and learn enough before we went that we wouldn't fall to any stupidity. Basically, if the pastor says to do this bad thing, you'll recognize that that's a bad thing. The thing of it is that a lot of people don't. They think that they will, but they really don't. Because they've basically been indoctrinated into a religion their entire lives. Asking questions was bad. Couldn't ask questions. That was just bad. Anyway, there was a lot. And they asked, no, it wasn't first grade. My grandmother had custody for us for a brief time. Yeah, so I was kind of in first grade, yeah. Or was it second? Anyway, it was somewhere in that time frame, generally. And we didn't really do the church thing. So, because, my mom wanted us to learn about different things and be tolerant. And she wanted us to pick. Like, she didn't, go out of her way to, teach us a bunch of shit. She just waited for us to be old enough to speak for ourselves instead of making us go whenever we were little. My brother actually chose church. And then they treated him like shit, and then he didn't want to go anymore. And, unless something has changed and he hasn't said anything, he's Christian. I chose fairly early on what I was going to be. And then I tried to make myself otherwise after my grandmother got custody of me permanently as a ward of the state and fucked my shit up. Anyway, I was constantly being told that I was worthless, the better twin died, and I at least supposed that a soul was worth more than a life. So, whenever the class was asked, who here would give their life for the soul of Hitler? I was Chris's age. 6 or 7, and I raised my hand and said that I would. And they got mad at me. They got mad at me because as soon as I did it, other kids started raising their hands because they asked me why. And I said, well, isn't a life worth less than a soul? If your soul is immortal, I was listening to the lesson. If your soul was immortal and you could just give this life to save someone else's soul, and maybe they would be a better person and not do terrible things anymore. That was my logic. That, Hitler would essentially not be Hitler. Maybe he wouldn't be a giant dick. Maybe he wouldn't hurt people anymore. I barely even understood that. I was 7. And they got mad at me. And apparently this had happened to other kids in the class. And you know what I learned growing up? They tell you that you're supposed, you end up being indoctrinated into this religion that you're supposed to follow this teaching of kindness. You're supposed to follow the teachings of this Jesus person. You're supposed to believe that this person is not a person, and that they are a son of God. You're supposed to follow all of their principles, and then you are supposed to forget them because you have a get-out-of-jail-free card, basically. And if you dare actually follow them with any sort of integrity, you're just, this is inconceivable. And this actually creates an environment that is counterproductive to actually following the teachings that they're supposed to be following, because they literally believe that it's impossible. And that they need that get-out-of-jail-free card because it's impossible. And you know what? There are pagans who adhere to much stricter rules that do not have a get-out-of-jail-free card. I can honestly say this, there is no get-out-of-jail-free card. If I fuck up, I fuck up. If I do harm, I cannot call myself wicked anymore. I don't get a get-out-of-jail-free card. And older paths are more strict about this because they have there are more lessons that have been learned and passed down. Neo-pagans they're new. This is all new and shiny to them. And generally speaking, there's at least some form of respect for the fact that they even try. But at the same time, it didn't really need a revival. It just needed people to stop fucking persecuting people for being a different religion. And that's the funniest thing about Christianity. Nobody's ever actually persecuting them. In this, except for but China does that to everybody. And then whenever, somebody is persecuting a religion, it's because they're just like them. It's either us or it's them. They make an enemy out of everybody. There's only like 3 religions that even take a stance even remotely like this. Christianity is one of them. And generally speaking, if you basically tell them that they can't be giant dicks to everybody and force their religion on everybody else, they will be like, it is a war against Christianity. Gene doesn't do this because Gene has actually read the Bible and is not an indoctrinated church fiend. He just read the Bible, and he actually used to be a pastor in training, and he embraced a message of peace and acceptance and of, living in harmony with people. The pastor who he was learning under was best friends with pagan. And they would sit there, and he actually watched and learned that this actually didn't make his faith weaker, actually made him smarter about his faith and kind of believe more strongly what he believed. You can't go up to a Christian who goes to church and just believes whatever they're told to. Would you stop trying to get in here? No. I'm gonna get child locks for the cabinets again. Really? We used to have them, and now they're not there, so we're just like, oh, I can get in. No, my knee's actually against it, so. Anyway, you can't tell them that, the ability to ask questions can actually be a good thing. I mean, I grew up going to church after losing my mom and going through the system and all that. They don't want you to ask questions. In fact, they get mad if you ask questions. They get mad if you genuinely have opinions they idealize. If you look even remotely like anything that they idealize, they will immediately jump on you as fake. As much as they want, they're like, oh, this is real somewhere, they cannot stand anything that is even remotely close to it. I don't understand these people. Well, I do I've spent a long time analyzing it. But yeah, Gene learned from a pastor who was very accepting and who actually read the Bible and decided that, he and his he needed to teach his congregation acceptance. And Gene was learning under him to be a pastor. And while he was doing this, the church moved, and he was unable to follow them. So he got left behind. He ended up getting married and all that, and going through some things. It's actually been a long time since then. I was actually looking for the pastor a while back to see if they were, still around, and turns out, Gene, he was like, well, you don't have to do that. But then he started looking too, and then he's like, somebody told me that he's dead. And I'm like, oh no. Because, this man helped make Gene who he is. And I wanted to express my gratitude to him. That Gene is not an unaccepting bigot. He believes what he believes. And he doesn't need to denote what anybody else believes, because what he believes is strong enough without doing that. If you have to attack someone else's beliefs to validate your own, you don't believe shit very strongly. And therein lies the problem. Most Christians are taught that not to accept anyone else for what they believe, and that they have to convert them, and everything is just Satan. I don't even believe in Satan. Like, literally, this is a story that was shoved down my throat whenever I was a kid. And I've studied it enough to know where it comes from. I've also studied it enough to know the origin of Christianity, which is not some godchild who existed on the planet. There is actually tangible proof that Christianity was actually created by Rome. It was a construct in an attempt to integrate Jewish people. Even doing this, though, it's not like this means that I have a problem with people who do believe it. As far as I'm concerned, if you believe in the things that are taught by Jesus, whether or not he was real or not, I don't really care, because this is noble. He just teaches people to be nice to each other. That's it. Like, don't stone each other, don't be violent dick faces. And the irony is that Rome was having the same problem with the Jewish people that places like France and whatnot are having with Muslims. They would not integrate. There's actually evidence that there was violence and all sorts of stuff. So whenever you have something, a group of people who won't integrate, and what they do is they get more and more into themselves, and then they decide that people who want them to integrate are actually just against them, and this is what happens. So there were problems. And this is why Jesus exists, because you can't just have someone, you can't just have a group of people refusing to integrate and, just being giant dick faces. This is also why Jesus actually embodies pagan concepts. Yes, these are all pagan concepts. One of the first, and before I even had done enough research to realize that this was not an accident, I actually used to say, you know what? Jesus is basically the perfect Wiccan. Don't hurt anybody. Advise kindness. Be like, hey, you know what? Children are our future. Let's not starve and beat them and be cruel. That's the thing. If you look at it, it's all about harming none. Rome was Hellenic. Not integrating was like the highest form of W2F. We don't know what to do with this. They were about respecting every religion. Like, not just live and let live. They were, you respect all the gods in every religion ever. And if you can't, you integrate these similar deities with one another, mesh their stories. They were about they were about super religion. They were like, as accepting as they were, this was like, so a group of people who would not integrate was like the biggest deal ever. It was not unusual for them to manufacture stories, to integrate religions. And this was actually normal practice for Rome. There's no proof that he's ever existed, and there's plenty of proof that he is an idea created by Hellenic priests to try and integrate Jewish people. So there you go. Will anyone ever listen to me? No. Absolutely not, especially Christians. No, but people who actually do the research, they don't need to listen to me because they already know where to find it. Hi, honey.
Hi.
The rolls are still out, the juice is still out. The salad dressing is still out. I put away the lunch meat though, so that I'll pause it. Love you, dear.
Love you too.
Anyway, I'm gonna wrap this up. He picked up crunchies. He wants chips with his sandwich. So, here's the thing.
Sorry, I just like to know I need the door for you.
I actually think that Jean is the truest and most beautiful Christian. And I don't mind it. I don't really care if you believe that it's real or not. I think that the pursuit to live a kinder life and follow a path of kindness is noble and worthy and honey. He doesn't like to be in the frame, so I try to pause before he ends up in it. So, and that's the thing. Generally, Christians, you go to church, and you're taught that other religions are completely against you, and anybody who doesn't believe the same thing that you do is completely against you, and they just want to lead you down astray. And yet, I find it entirely ironic that I grew up most of my life taught this, and then I turn around and I do the exact opposite with you. He's been like, I'm not Christian, and I'm like, you believe that Jesus existed? You do what you can to emulate this. You are Christian in every sense of the word. Don't you throw raspberries at me, dear. But he just sees so many people who call themselves that do so many bad things and be so shitty to other people who believe different things that he's just like, his reasoning is that he doesn't want to be associated with that. And I'm just like, don't make me get out the Bible. He won't go to church. And I actually spent a long time finding one that genuinely really did just kind of read the Bible. It's fine, dear. There's some unopened bologna in there still. And there should be some pepperoni. Some salami. Anyway. I don't know. I don't care if you believe something, nothing. I don't care if you think that the world should burn or that everyone needs saving. I care when two burly guys show up at my door all burly and assertive and I don't care how you're built. You can't walk up to somebody's front door with that attitude. It just puts people on edge. You have to, I actually went through training for this. There was a point in my life I actually went through training for this. So there's an actual method to walking up to people's doors, as scary as that is. I was bad at it just because it terrifies me. And, yeah. But there's an actual method. And because I've had bad experiences, it puts me in a bad place because, you never know. Anyway, Jean, a Christian, two different traditions of Wicca, Wiccans, and an atheist. Yeah.
Who's the atheist?
Isn't Tim an atheist,
Yeah, I think so.
or is it non-religious? Sometimes he's kind of like, eh. What's really funny is that most of the atheists that you see online just hate religion in general. But yeah, his wife's Wiccan. He just doesn't believe in anything. And he doesn't particularly think that he has the right to tell her what to believe. That's kind of just everyone else. Christianity is just sort of like, but we have to tell you what to believe. You also have to understand that this idea that religion exists to tell people how to live and what to do also kind of, honey, you know I could have made that for you, right?
Yeah.
Okay, he feels like he's gonna do it tonight. Not that I'm complaining.
Because you're recording, it can sometimes take forever.
Oh, stop, I'm almost done. It cut me off earlier.
No, I could take a stick awake.
Love you. So, yeah, I mean, most people are just like, we don't care as long as... Yeah, we don't care as long as you're not a dick to people. As long as you're not forcing your religion on us or anyone around us. And, like, if I see you hurting somebody, I have to stop you. But I also have to consider how to do this without my help becoming harm. Like, that's... Like, it's actually way more complicated than just help. you have to, like... I'm freezing my ass off.
I'm burning up.
And my stomach is, like, threatening to just puke everywhere. Ugh. So anyway... Yeah, I'm getting completely sidetracked. Anyway, that's the stupidity about it, is that you're taught that other religions basically exist to undermine Christianity. And I'm just like, actually, Christianity exists to undermine Judaism. And its rather xenophobic tendencies. Like, they tribalized even whenever they were supposed to be integrating. But this was a group of people who literally created a religion to avoid, like, out of fear of losing their culture, and ended up alienating everyone else and causing violence and untold anarchy. So that's why Jesus exists. Because you can't have people in a community stoning other people in a community and have a peaceful coexistence with other people. Yeah. You just can't have it. But, you know, I'm okay with... You know, I've probably only met, like, people who actually follow it the way that they're supposed to. I've only met enough that can fit on one hand. And I've actually been to a lot of churches in my life. Like, I went through a lot trying to make myself Christian. What I ended up doing was becoming someone that they kept on using it as an example. And, like, what? Like, wow, she rode her bike 10 miles to get here. You know, that sort of thing. Yeah, there was actually a point I rode my bike through a reservation and ended up chased by dogs. Because, you know, the res dogs are not... I was like 18 and this was actually pretty scary. So, yeah. I was completely and totally late. Next time I had a ride there, but... yeah, they were... using me as an example because of this, and I was just... They're trying to use me as an example to make people believe more strongly, and I need the answers that I need. And these churches, they preach blind obedience, blind faith, but faith is not blind. That's the problem. Belief is not blind. It actually does need to be supported. People do not naturally believe that strongly unless they are utterly brainwashed. And that's where that comes in. With Rome, though, religion, there was no separation of church and state. The church was the state. And that's why there's a lot of this illusion. A lot of people who are atheists, they grew up completely Christian. This is the only thing that they knew. So they don't know that there are actually religions out there that are completely accepting, of other religions. All they know is that religion seemed to just exist to tell them how to live, how to think, and how to feel. And it actually doesn't. But the Romans used this as a tool to manage an empire that was far more vast than could be organically handled. So their reach was too far, so they used religion as a means of controlling people on a deeper level. So this is actually an interesting bit of, how they managed to do that. But also, it's why Christianity exists. The Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church, is basically a remnant of the Roman government. Yeah. And like Rome became, it has fallen into corruption and has been that way for quite some time. Anyway, other things stem from that, other portions of Christianity. But then that's actually the natural way that religion goes. It starts as one thing, it branches out. I know Neo-Wiccans don't really realize this, but Wicca, the path with the vows to harm none, that sounds quite a lot like the Hippocratic Oaths, and where the Hippocratic Oaths are actually advised to be studied, along with some other things. Yeah. It actually came from Druidism. The Druids came before Wicca. And that is also why Wiccans are typically kind of tree huggy. The actual Druids, I've never met any Druids today, in today's day and age, that are actually like Druids of old. It was kind of required learning for me. It's also part of my family history, which was its own thing. Sometimes if you tell people that my grandmother carried family history and verbatim and passed it on to her oldest daughter, and her oldest daughter passed it on, and she just didn't want to pass it on otherwise. She actually had an actual goal to just have it be gone. But there was an old superstition about not passing it on at all. So if my grandmother had her way, nobody would have passed on the story anymore. I actually suspect that it's only been as an adult that I could think on it enough to suppose that might be why she did some of the things that she did, trying to prevent my mom and my aunt and me from having kids. I don't know if that's why my aunt can't have kids, but I have a pretty good idea. But I'm never going to tell her, because it would probably just break her. Because she can't actually deal. My aunt has no chill. And she can't deal with it. She's one of those people who just walks around saying, I'm fine. And the moment she's faced with anything, like, I reached out to her whenever I was 18 years old, and she started screaming at me like I was my mom. Whenever I asked her if she'd ever been through any of the things that my grandmother had done to me, she started screaming at me like I was my mom. She completely forgot who she was talking to. First, she was screaming about my mom and how my mom was a liar, and I never even knew anything even happened to my mom, other than, like, my grandmother said some things, but my grandmother said a lot of things, so I'd kind of dismissed it. I didn't actually start looking to see what had happened until my aunt screamed those things at me. I'd kind of just thought that I was the only one, and I was actually reaching out to my aunt under the advice of a therapist who had said that typically a lot of people think that they're the only ones and they're not. And my aunt was screaming all these things at me, and later she would say that she didn't. But one of the things that she slipped out, the reason that she thought that my mom was so mean and cruel, was because she left her there. Later, she would claim to, like, not remember any of this. But it's stuck with me. It's why I started looking and asking questions about certain things. I found some answers I didn't particularly care for. Quite a few, actually. But they're the truth, and I would rather know than not. So, anyway, my grandmother was an immensely fucked up person who fucked up her children and me, the granddaughter. She had 2 more grandkids that she didn't fuck up. Mostly because she couldn't sink her claws into all of us. She got me. Yeah, but we were all damaged, so. The difference is that I talk about it, which is the most offensive thing ever in that family. Except for, I think my mom would support it if she were alive. Actually, my mom would have probably just killed my grandmother if she ever found out that she'd done half the shit that she did. Mom or not, there was a reason, I guess, why some of this stuff never happened until she was dead. Like, I was actually under the illusion that my grandmother did care about me until my mom died. Mostly because if my mom had gotten wind of some of this stuff, she would have never seen me again. Anyway, everybody has their family stuff. My mom decided not to be that, and she wasn't. So, in a way, it was actually easier for me to not be that, because my mom wasn't. I had examples. They weren't always what I thought they were whenever I was a kid. Whenever I grew up, I've never gotten to the point whenever I would thank my grandmother, like she always told me I would. But I've gotten to the point where I've thanked my grandfather for things that he's taught me, and I've wished that my mom was here so I could thank her. Mostly, though, as I've gotten older, I've just come to deeper realizations of how messed up the things that my grandmother did were. Anyway, I'm gonna end it, because I'm getting into that area of things, and I don't really want to talk about it. I don't. I've talked about it a million times, and it's not like the people I need to hear me are ever going to hear me. And that's my own issue. No amount of therapy is ever going to change it. Trust me, I tried. All it does is teach you how to live with it. It doesn't actually change the fact that you have to live with it. I don't understand some people and why they think that like therapy is supposed to fix you. It really doesn't. I mean, I guess if you're specifically like a certain type of broken, there's a certain extent that it could help you, but like I'm not trying to kill myself or anything. The problem isn't the way that I think. The problem is that bad shit happened. And I have emotional damage. There is mental damage and emotional damage. All the therapy that could possibly be done has been done. No amount of therapy or medication could ever change the fact that there is emotional damage. And I just have to learn how to live with it. Oh, I do live with it, and I did learn how to live with it. But also, I talk about it, so like, it kind of pisses them off. And I admit, I know it does. And I know that while I do try to avoid my aunt knowing that I do, just because I'm kind of afraid of what it would do to her, I don't really give two shits what the rest of them think. In fact, I will completely admit there's even a part of me that hopes it pisses them off as much as it hurts me that they take that stance, that it's worse that I talk about it than that it actually happened. Because for them, their reputations are more important than the fact that this shit happened. Because, you know, my grandmother's brother is a pastor. He's a Baptist minister. Yeah. They tend to put a lot of stock in what people think of them. And you can't up and talk about bad shit like this because, you know, it's kind of like whenever you talk about anything negative that the Jewish community, that has come out of the Jewish community, and immediately someone will call it anti-Semitism. Now, while I'll admit that there is some level of stuff that has happened, some level of negativity that isn't deserved, in that I've actually been on the receiving end of some of that. I can also say that not talking about things or talking about them anti-Semitism is not okay. So yeah, it's not okay. Like my grandfather actually had, he went and told me, you know, that his mom and his grandma were Jewish. But that we couldn't talk about it because, you know, of stuff like that. And, you know, as I grew up, I learned different things listening to him. There was a lot that I don't even know if, like, he even knows, like,